A young woman, barely past 20, was pushed onto the auction block. Her eyes were hollow, her spirit torn to shreds, her very name traded like cheap livestock. Her life sold away in exchange for silence. Amid the crowd of jeers and cruel laughter, a man stepped forward and did the unthinkable. He bought her, yet never laid a single hand upon her. His gaze was not one of cruelty, but carried the shadows of a grief too deep, too strange to name. As the desert winds rose, strange signs began to stir. A horse that refused to leave her side, a lonely cabin in the wilderness, holding secrets unspoken. Was this her salvation, or the first step into a destiny even darker than before? Dust Ridge in late autumn of 1877 was a place that breathed hostility. The town clung to the Arizona frontier like a scar that refused to heal, its buildings leaning under the weight of dust and neglect. The main street lay half-buried in copper-colored grit, stirred by wind that carried the faint stench of sweat, liquor, and cattle. Shadows stretched long under a bruised violet sky, and the whole place felt like a wound pressed against the desert. Tonight, that wound gathered around a platform of warped planks nailed together in the square. Torches burned low, their flames jittering in the restless air. The crowd was restless too. Men shifted in their boots, muttering through tobacco-stained teeth. The murmur rose and fell like the low growl of a caged beast, carried on smoke and whiskey breath. They were ranchers, drifters, gamblers, and broken men faces carved by the desert sun, eyes sharpened by suspicion. None of them came for compassion. They came for spectacle. At the center stood Hank Miller, his belly straining against a dust-smeared waistcoat, his round face flushed red from whiskey. He clutched a ledger under one arm, the other hand raised to silence the crowd. Hank had made a career out of reducing life to numbers, livestock, land, or flesh. His voice, roughened by years of shouting over auctions, cracked through the square. "Gentlemen, our final lot for the night. Young, capable, a woman with the grit to endure frontier life." Two men shoved Claire Donovan forward into the torchlight. She was 24, yet the way she held her spine made her seem older, hardened by seasons harsher than her years. The hem of her blue cotton dress brushed the splintered boards, torn and patched so many times the fabric bore a history of survival. Her dark chestnut hair fell in loose waves, tangled by the wind, framing a face pale with hunger but marked by striking green eyes that refused to drop. Those eyes unsettled the men who met them. They burned steady, neither pleading nor broken. At her wrist lay the mark, a pale scar where rope had once bitten deep. The crowd's murmur shifted to a hiss. "She don't look right," a voice spat. "Too calm," another muttered. "No fear in her eyes." "Marked," someone whispered. "Not natural." Claire heard it all. Her jaw clenched, though her face betrayed nothing. If they wanted her shame, they would starve for it. Inside, her chest tightened, but it was not fear, it was defiance. Every gaze on her was a weight pressing down, yet she refused to bend. For an instant, her thoughts betrayed her. She remembered the ranch she had once called home, reduced to blackened earth, and the grave of her younger brother laid in the dry soil. Loss had taught her one truth: no one was coming to save her. If she survived, it would be because she refused to collapse. Hank cleared his throat, sweat gleaming on his temple. "Who will start the bidding?" Silence. The crowd shifted, boots scraping wood, but no hands lifted. They had waited for her to be last, not out of kindness, but out of cruelty. Her scar unnerved them. Her unflinching stare angered them. What man wanted a woman who would not bow? "Come now," Hank pressed, his voice cracking under the strain. "Strong back, young Bones." A laugh cut him off. "Bones cursed by the devil." The words spread quickly, igniting more laughter, jagged and cruel. Claire stood still as their laughter broke against her like a wave. She wanted to spit the truth back in their faces, but she knew words would feed their hunger. She let silence be her weapon. Then the laughter faltered. Boots struck earth with deliberate rhythm, the sound echoing like distant thunder. The crowd parted, their jeers caught in their throats as a man stepped into the torchlight. Samuel Whitaker. He was 39, but grief had carved a decade deeper into his frame. Tall yet gaunt, his once broad shoulders carried the weight of years bent by sorrow. A weathered duster clung to him, its edges frayed, its fabric coated with dust that no brush could erase. His beard, streaked with iron gray, shadowed a mouth that rarely spoke. But it was his eyes, steel blue, cold as mountain stone, that silenced the square. Everyone in Dust Ridge knew his story. Once he had been a rancher, a husband, a father. Then came the Crow Gang, fire and blood sweeping his land. His wife and children gone in a single night, buried by his own hands. Since then, he had lived like a ghost, drinking little, speaking less, carrying grief like a noose. Now that ghost raised his hand. "I'll take her." His voice was low, stripped bare, but it carried. The laughter died instantly. Hank blinked, caught between disbelief and relief. You'll take her?" Sam's gaze didn't waver from Claire. There was no hunger in it, no lust. It was as though he was looking through her, into some abyss she couldn't see. "Name the price." The ledger snapped open. Hank scribbled quickly. Coins exchanged hands. The murmurs grew uneasy, edged with fear. No one dared challenge him. Claire's stomach knotted. She should have felt relief someone had claimed her and she would not be left in the dust like discarded goods. But what she saw in Sam's eyes unsettled her more than laughter or jeers. His gaze held not desire nor kindness, but the hollow chill of a man who had forgotten how to live. The crowd scattered, muttering. Dust Ridge had its show, and now it would slink to the saloon for whiskey and dice. Hank slammed his ledger shut, sweat darkening his collar. "Done. She's yours, Whitaker." The torches spat sparks as the wind turned colder. Sam extended a hand, not to touch her but to indicate the path. Claire hesitated. Every instinct screamed to resist, yet the alternative abandonment in this pitiless square left no choice. She stepped down, boots striking the earth beside his. They walked through the thinning crowd. Eyes followed them, some pitying, others gleeful, most indifferent. Claire kept her chin high, though doubt churned in her chest. She stole a glance at Sam. His face was stone, unreadable. Behind them, Dust Ridge faded, its torches shrinking like dying stars. The wind rattled the saloon sign, mocking her with its hollow clang. She tightened her fists at her sides, her scar burning as though it had just been carved. The man beside her walked with a silence heavier than chains, and she could not shake the thought pressing into her ribs. Had she just been bought, or had she been bound to something far darker? The desert night swallowed Dust Ridge until it was nothing but a smear of torchlight fading into memory. The rhythm of hooves drummed against the frozen earth, each strike sharp as a hammer on an anvil. Wind carried the dry scent of sage and dust, brushing cold against Claire's cheeks. The saddle creaked beneath her, leather shifting with each sway of the horse. She sat rigid in front of Samuel Whitaker on the broad back of his roan gelding. The animal's flanks steamed in the chill, breath rising in ghostly ribbons that dissolved under the moon. Claire felt the weight of the man behind her, not in touch, for he had not laid a hand upon her, but in presence. His silence pressed against her more heavily than iron. His hands gripped only the reins, steady, as if nothing else in the world was worth holding. She fixed her eyes on the horizon, where beauties clawed upward in black jagged shapes, cutting the star-drenched sky. But inside, her thoughts spun. Who was this man? What future did he drag her toward? He had bought her before the eyes of the town, but his gaze had not been one of triumph. It had been emptiness, the hollow stare of a man who carried ghosts. The roan crested a rise. From there she saw it. A cabin crouched in the hollow below. Its chimney leaned crooked, catching the moonlight like a finger pointing at heaven. No smoke, no glow, no sign of life. The place resembled not a home, but a sentence, a corner of the world carved for a man who had turned his back on company. A small corral fenced in a patch of earth, and a lean-to shelter hunched beside it. Sam dismounted first, his shadow stretching long across the frost-hardened ground. He reached as though to help her down, then withdrew, fingers twitching once before curling into his coat. Claire slid down on her own, boots striking the earth with a muted crunch. "This is yours tonight," Sam said. His voice was gravel-low, stripped bare of warmth. He nodded toward the cabin. The doors open. Firewood stacked inside. She stared at him, unsure. "And you?" "I'll be with the horses." The words settled between them like stones in a grave. He turned away before she could question him further, leading the gelding toward the barn. His frame seemed built from shadow, more comfortable melting into darkness than standing in lamplight. Claire entered the cabin. A single room greeted her. Narrow bed against one wall, a table scratched by years of use, a hearth of stone, empty and cold. A few jars sat on a shelf, their labels bleached pale. Dust lay thick as silence. The place smelled of wood left too long without fire. It was not welcoming, but it was roof and walls, and in that moment, shelter was enough. She struck a match, lit the lamp, and let the glow spread across the room. Light gilded the scar on her wrist, that pale reminder of rope. She traced it with her thumb. Sam had not touched her, had not commanded her. He had given her warmth and taken cold for himself. Cruelty she would have understood. Restraint unsettled her more deeply. Still, instinct screamed. A man hollowed by loss was not harmless. She knelt, reached into her boot, and drew out a knife. The handle was smooth with years, the blade notched but sharp enough. She tested its edge against her thumb, then slid it back into hiding. It was her one anchor of control. Hours bled together. Wind rattled the shutters like restless fingers. Claire lay on the bed, eyes open to the dark. She thought of Dust Ridge, the jeers, the laughter, the moment Sam had lifted his hand. His silence was worse than words. It left her to imagine, and imagination was a crueler torment. Every creak of timber whispered that she was prey. Finally she rose. Waiting was a heavier chain than action. She pulled the coarse shawl from the bed's footboard, wrapped it tight, and snuffed the lamp. Opening the door slowly, she let the cold night rush in. The air smelled of horses, dry grass, and smoke from some far ranch unseen. She stepped into the yard. Frost glittered like glass shards under the moon. The fence loomed at the edge, its rails shining silver. Beyond it stretched the desert, merciless but unclaimed. Freedom lay there, even if it was freedom into hunger and cold. Her pulse beat hard. She crossed the yard, boots whispering over the frost, breath sharp in her throat. Fingers gripped the top rail of the fence. She planted one foot, pulling herself upward. The splinters cut into her palm pane, sharp and grounding. She was almost over. Then a voice cut the night. I wondered how long it would take. Claire froze. Her head jerked toward the sound. A figure pulled free from the darkness. Sam. He stood at the corner of the fence, moonlight outlining his broad shoulders, the long coat that hung around him like a shroud. His eyes caught faint silver, hard and steady. She clung to the fence, breath ragged. The knife pressed at her ankle, but it felt suddenly useless, a child's toy against the certainty in his stance. Sam didn't move toward her, didn't raise his voice. If you mean to run, I won't stop you. The calm was worse than threat. His tone carried no anger, no surprise, only inevitability, as though her escape had been written long before she tried it. What do you want from me? She whispered, words cracking more from frustration than fear. His eyes flickered. Some shadow crossed them. Pain, memory, something she could not read. Then it was gone. That's the question you should be asking yourself. The silence that followed closed in, pressing against her chest. The wind sighed through sage. Somewhere a coyote called. Claire gripped the rail until her knuckles ached, fury and confusion storming inside her. He didn't step forward, didn't reach for her. He simply stood in the dark, waiting. Waiting with the patience of a man who had buried everything and had nothing left to lose. And that patience terrified her more than any chain could. The desert held its breath. The night did not loosen its grip. Claire still stood at the fence, hands curled around the splintered rail, heart hammering against her ribs. Sam's calm words lingered like smoke. If you mean to run, I won't stop you. He had turned her defiance into confusion, her resolve into something trembling and unsteady. Sam finally shifted, boots crunching against the frost. He walked past her, not sparing another glance, and moved toward the corral gate. Wolves come down from the ridge this time of year, he said quietly. If you go, keep your knife ready. They hunt in pairs. The words were not a command, not even a plea. They were a warning, offered without obligation. Claire released the fence rail slowly, her knuckles raw and white. He left her in silence, his long frame moving toward the lean-to where the gelding waited. Back inside the cabin, the air felt heavier than before. Claire sat on the narrow bed, knife still hidden in her boot. She was free. He had told her so. But freedom felt like a mirage, always just beyond her reach. The walls did not imprison her, yet she could not walk past them without fear of what prowled outside. Through the shutter, she glimpsed Sam moving in the yard. He stacked wood with methodical patience, his coat pulling tight across his gaunt shoulders. Soon a fire crackled in the pit by the barn, flames licking upward, sparks drifting into the dark. He placed a pot above it, filled with water drawn from the well. Steam rose in pale ribbons, mingling with the smoke. Claire pressed her hand against the window pane. He was making warmth for her. And then he lay down beside the fire, coat wrapped around him, his head resting on the saddle he had carried all these years. His figure stretched long in the firelight, neither vulnerable nor threatening, simply resigned. Why? Why would a man who had bought her choose the cold ground over the bed inside? Why guard her with silence instead of chains? Hours dragged. She slept little, ears pricked for movement outside. Twice she heard wolves, distant but nearer than comfort allowed. Their howls rose in eerie harmony, only to fade as the fire's glow flared higher. Each time, she expected Sam to stir. Each time, he did not. By morning, gray light bled across the horizon. Claire pushed open the cabin door, breath misting in the chill. Sam was already on his feet, stacking more wood onto the fire, the lines of his face deep in shadow. For the first time, she saw how tired he looked, the circles beneath his eyes, the gray threading through his beard. A man older than his years, carrying weight heavier than iron. She stepped closer, careful. "You didn't sleep," she said. He shrugged once. "I slept enough." "You're not keeping me here." It was half a statement, half a question. Sam's gaze flicked to hers, steady as steel. "You want to leave? Leave. Doors open." Then he turned back to the fire. "But if you stay, you'll find the nights aren't kind. Best to have a fire waiting, and water hot." Claire's throat tightened. It was not affection. It was not cruelty. It was something in between, a purgatory she could not name. The day passed slow. Sam worked the corral fence, hammering loose boards back into place. Claire stayed near the cabin, pacing, restless. She watched him from a distance, his movements deliberate, precise. He wasted nothing, not even strength. His silence was a cage without locks, binding her more tightly than iron shackles. By late afternoon, wind swept down from the ridge, carrying dust and whispers. Claire was gathering kindling near the cabin when hoofbeats thundered faint across the plain. Not the steady rhythm of a single rider, but a scatter, a rush like rocks tumbling down a canyon wall. She straightened, clutching the bundle to her chest. Sam looked up sharply. His hand went to the rifle propped against the corral post. "Riders," he muttered. Moments later, a lone horseman galloped into the hollow. Dust streaked his face, his hat askew, eyes wide with panic. He pulled hard on the reins, the animal lathered with foam. Claire stepped back, pulse quickening. The rider was young, no more than 20. His skin was burned dark by the sun, his cheeks hollow. Fear lived in his eyes. He slid from the saddle, boots stumbling. "Crow gang," he gasped. They're burning through Widow's Bluff, killing, stealing." His voice cracked. "They'll be here soon." Claire's blood ran cold. She had heard whispers of the Crow gang even in Dust Ridge, men without mercy, who cut through settlements like wildfire. Sam's face did not change, but a shadow crossed it, deep and hard. He gripped the rifle, checking the chamber with steady hands. "How many?" The boy swallowed. "Too many." His gaze darted to Claire, then back to Sam. "You can't stay." Sam's silence stretched. Claire could feel the tension coiling in him like a rope drawn taut. His calm was different now, not resignation, but the quiet before thunder. He walked past Claire into the cabin. She followed, heart hammering. Inside, he reached beneath the bed frame and drew out a wooden box, scarred and worn. He set it on the table, opened it and lifted a revolver, polished though old. Beneath it lay letters, folded and stained. Claire glimpsed the handwriting names, words blurred by age and tears. She realized what they were. Letters never sent. Letters to ghosts. Sam's jaw tightened. He closed the box, leaving the letters where they were, and strapped the revolver to his side. His hands moved with certainty, the movements of a man who had done this before, too many times. Claire's voice broke the silence. "You're preparing to fight them." Sam looked at her then, his eyes dark as storm clouds. "They'll come. And when they do, there'll be blood." Her chest tightened. For a moment, she saw not just a man, but the battlefield written in his face, the memory of fire and screams. of family lost. The Crow gang wasn't just a threat. They were a summons, dragging him back into a war he had never left. Sam moved to the doorway, rifle in hand. Claire felt her knees weaken, the kindling slipping from her grasp. She understood then. The past he carried was about to come crashing into their present, brutal and merciless, and there was no escaping it. Darkness had already pooled deep across the valley when the first gunshot split the silence like glass breaking under weight. Claire jerked at the sound, clutching the frame of the cabin door, her breath stalling in her chest. The night, moments ago serene with nothing but the whisper of wind through Widow's Bluff, erupted into chaos. The crackle of gunfire rolled down the ridges, echoing like thunder. Sam was already outside, the rifle braced against his shoulder, his silhouette rigid against the glow of the firelight he had kindled hours earlier. His eyes, cold steel beneath the brim of his hat, flicked from shadow to shadow as the valley spat out its riders. From the ridge above, figures materialized, riders in dark coats, their horses frothing, their voices breaking the night with crude shouts. Torches flared in their hands, burning brands carried like banners of conquest. The Crow gang. Their reputation had stalked the desert like a phantom for years. Marauders who plundered without mercy, who left entire settlements smoldering. Claire's pulse hammered. She had heard stories in Dust Ridge, whispers traded in corners of the saloon, of the gang's cruelty men strung up on telegraph poles, families left with nothing but cinders. Tonight, those tales rode flesh and blood toward her. Sam barked without turning his head, his voice even but edged with command. "Inside. Bolt the door." But Claire did not move. She stood frozen, her hand pressed to the wood as though it alone could anchor her to the earth. She saw Sam lower one knee to the ground, steadying the rifle. When the gang thundered closer, he fired. The shot cracked like judgment. A rider toppled sideways off his horse, hitting the ground with a hollow thud. Chaos followed, curses, the roar of pistols, the shriek of animals spooked by fire. Claire flinched, her ears ringing, yet she could not drag herself away. The gang swept around the cabin in a half-circle, gunfire flashing in jagged bursts. Bullets chewed into timber, splinters raining across the yard. Sam moved with a discipline that startled her. No wild panic, no wasted shots. He fired, shifted, fired again, his body fluid, deliberate. Every motion spoke of experience born from violence, and from wounds she could not see. One rider broke from the pack, charging toward the cabin with a torch raised high. Claire's throat closed. Before she could scream, Sam's rifle cracked, and the torch flew from the man's grasp as he spun, crumpling into the dirt. Yet amid the fury, Claire noticed something that unsettled her more than the violence itself: restraint. Sam never fired blind. He waited until he had a target, even as bullets hissed past his shoulders. When another rider staggered into the clearing, a boy no older than 17, his face pale in the torchlight, Sam aimed, then froze. The boy's hands shook as he raised a revolver far too heavy for his grip. Claire's breath hitched. She expected Sam to pull the trigger, to end the threat before it could end him. Instead, in that suspended heartbeat, she watched Sam's jaw lock, his finger easing from the trigger. "Go!" Sam's voice thundered. "Get out!" The boy blinked, terror flooding his face before he scrambled back into the dark. Shots still cracked, fire still burned, yet that single choice lodged inside Claire's chest like a shard of glass. Why? The battle dragged on. Claire finally ducked inside, pulling the door to as Sam had ordered, though she kept a narrow crack open. She watched him through it, his tall frame lit by firelight, smoke curling around him like the breath of hell. He fought like a man who had made his peace with death, and that chilled her more than the prospect of dying herself. Time blurred into chaos minutes, stretching into eternities of thunder and smoke. Finally, silence began to settle. The last of the gang retreated, dragging their wounded into the night. Their curses faded into the hollow of the valley, leaving only the whistle of wind and the stench of gunpowder. Claire pushed the door wide. Her legs trembled as she stepped into the wreckage of the yard's splintered rails, churned earth, bodies sprawled where they had fallen. Sam stood among them, the rifle slack at his side, his face lit by the dying embers of torchlight. He did not look like a victor. He looked like a man who had killed enough to hollow himself out. "Why spare him?" Claire's voice cracked as she crossed the yard. "That boy you could have—" Sam cut her off, his tone low, flat. "He wasn't older than my son would be." The words landed heavier than bullets. Claire froze, staring at him as pieces of an unseen puzzle shifted into place. He didn't elaborate. He simply turned, walked toward the lean-to, and set down his rifle as though it had grown too heavy for his hands. Later, when the yard lay still and the stars reclaimed their dominion, Claire found herself unable to sleep. Her body shook with the echo of every shot, every scream. Needing air, she crept through the cabin, her hand brushing against the table, then halted. At its base, half hidden beneath a wool blanket, sat a small chest, rough, iron-banded, its edges worn from travel. She hesitated only a moment before lifting the lid. Inside, bundled carefully despite the dust, were letters. Dozens of them, folded and tied with faded string. She pulled one free, the parchment soft from years of handling. The ink had bled in places, blurred by what could only be tears. "Dearest Anna," it began. Her throat tightened. Each word bared Sam's soul in ways his silence never could. Apologies stacked upon apologies, grief pouring out onto the page like blood that refused to clot. He wrote of nights haunted by fire, of a wife and child lost in flames he could not outrun, of guilt so sharp it carved him hollow. Claire's chest ached. She should have stopped, but her eyes devoured every line. He had been writing to ghosts, carrying their memory like chains, and now here she was, a stranger thrust into the orbit of his torment. The cabin door creaked. She jolted, the letter slipping from her hands. Sam stood in the threshold, shoulders squared, his gaze burning hotter than the embers outside. For the first time she saw fury not turned outward at enemies, but inward, toward his own scars. "What are you doing?" His voice was quiet, yet it cracked the air like thunder. Claire's lips parted, no excuse forming fast enough. Her hands trembled above the chest, the damning letters scattered like fallen leaves. Sam stepped closer, firelight catching the storm in his eyes. "Those ghosts are mine," he said, his tone low, unshakable. "Not yours." Claire could only stare, her pulse frantic, the room closing around her. The letters seemed to scream from the table, binding her in the weight of his grief. The silence that followed was unbearable. Then, in a voice rough as gravel yet burning with pain, Sam added, "They're all I have left. Don't take them from me." The words cut sharper than any blade. Claire's throat constricted, her heart tearing between pity and fear. She had glimpsed the fire inside him, and now she understood it was not just the fire of battle, but the fire of memory, of ghosts he refused to release. The night pressed in. Beyond the walls, the valley lay in ruin. Inside, the air smoldered with secrets too heavy for two souls bound together by fate. The night had not finished with them. Widow's Bluff still trembled with the echoes of gunfire when the silence cracked open once more. Claire had barely laid her head against the cabin wall, heart still hammering from the earlier fight, when she heard it, the slow, growing thunder of hooves. Her breath caught. Sam, who had not slept, moved before she could speak. His shadow filled the cabin door, lean frame tense as a drawn bow. He glanced once toward her, and she saw the grim certainty in his storm-gray eyes. "They're not done," he murmured. "Crow always comes back." The window shattered inward before she could answer. A hand shot through the frame, calloused, reeking of sweat and whiskey, and seized her by the wrist. She screamed, thrashing, but another figure crashed through the door, dragging her out into the bitter night. The ground tore at her boots, dirt and frost cutting her skin as she stumbled. The air outside was thick with smoke and horse sweat. Torches flared, their light catching faces she had hoped never to see again. The Crow gang, in force this time, fury written into every scar and sneer. "Got her!" one bellowed, his laughter cutting like a saw. Claire kicked, twisted, tried to claw free, but a fist slammed across her cheek, sending stars bursting behind her eyes. Warm blood traced down her jaw. She was shoved against a tree at the clearing's edge, her back scraping bark. Rope cut cruelly into her wrists, binding her fast. The man tying the knots was heavy-set, nose bent from an old break, a gold tooth gleaming when he grinned. His breath stank of rot-gut whiskey as he leaned close. "Thought you could hide behind Whitaker? Let's see how much fight he's got when we carve you up." His laughter drew others in, their faces leering through the firelight. One carried a scar down his temple, another had a cruel burn puckered across his throat. They jeered, spit, taunted as if she were already meat for slaughter. Claire fought to steady her breath. Fear roared through her veins, but she forced her chin up, glaring through hair matted with dust and blood. She would not give them her terror, not yet. Then the cabin door opened. Sam stepped into the light, rifle in hand, shoulders squared despite the blood still drying on his shirt from the earlier fight. His shadow stretched long across the frozen earth, his presence halting the laughter for a single breath. "Let her go!" His voice cut across the clearing like steel scraping stone. The crooked-nosed man spat into the dirt. "Or what, Whitaker? You're one man, we're a dozen." He bared his yellow teeth. "And you're half dead already." Sam's grip tightened on the rifle. "Then let's see if a dozen's enough." The gang surged. The first rider spurred forward, firing wild. Sam's rifle cracked, the shot tearing him clean out of the saddle. Horses reared, screaming. Another rushed from the flank, pistol flashing. Sam pivoted, slammed the rifle butt into the man's jaw, and dropped him where he stood. But they kept coming. Claire twisted against the ropes, every muscle straining until her wrists burned raw. Bark bit into her skin, but she couldn't stop watching. Sam fought like a man possessed, precise, merciless, each strike a declaration that he would not yield. Then she saw the gleam of steel. A lanky man with a scarred temple broke through the fray, knife glinting in torchlight. He charged straight for her, blade raised high. Claire froze, her heart slamming against her ribs. Sam moved before she could cry out. He hurled himself forward, no rifle in hand now, just bare fists and desperate speed. The knife slashed downward and he threw his body between her and the blow. The steel bit deep. Claire's scream tore into the night. The knife slid into Sam's side, the sound sickening, wet. He staggered, but with a growl that was half fury, half agony, he drove his fist into the attacker's face, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Blood poured from the wound, staining his shirt, dripping into the frost. Claire yanked at her ropes until they tore her skin open, but the fibers held. Sam turned, eyes locking with hers. For a moment she saw the boy he once must have been, the father who had lost everything, the man who carried ghosts heavier than chains, and still, he stood for her. The crooked-nosed brute barked orders. "Take him down!" 3 rushed at once. Sam met them barehanded, his fists flying, boots crunching bone and dirt. One went down, another reeled back, but the third slammed into him hard. Blood spattered across the clearing as fists struck his face. Still he would not fall. Claire's tears blurred her vision, but she could hear it all. The grunt of effort, the crack of bone, the roar of men who could not bring one man to his knees. She thrashed, twisted, until finally a rope strand gave way. Pain sliced across her wrists as blood welled, but she ripped harder, desperate. Then Sam faltered. His knees buckled. He dropped to the dirt, the world around him spinning. Blood flowed in a dark river down his side, pooling at Claire's feet. "No!" she screamed, her voice raw. The last rope snapped as she tore free, stumbling to him. She dropped to her knees, cradling his head in her lap. His eyes flickered open, clouded with pain. His lips parted, breath shallow, ragged. She pressed her hands to the wound, feeling the hot blood soak her palms. "Stay with me," she whispered fiercely, tears streaking her face. "Don't you dare leave me here." The gang laughed, circling like vultures. Torches hissed, shadows dancing across the clearing. But Claire no longer saw them. She bent low, her forehead against his, her voice shaking with rage and love and defiance. "If you want to live," she breathed into the night, "then let me teach you how." The world seemed to hold its breath. The gang shifted, uneasy, as if sensing a storm not of bullets but of will rising in the broken woman before them. Claire's hands pressed harder, her tears falling into Sam's blood. Her voice rang louder, steadier. "You don't get to die like this. Not tonight. Not while I'm here." And though the fire burned, though the knives gleamed, though the night was filled with cruel laughter there, in that fragile circle, it was no longer the Crow Gang's victory. It was hers. Dawn broke over Widow's Bluff in pale streaks of rose and gold. The fires of the night were gone, leaving only charred earth, scattered cartridges, and blood-soaked frost. Claire sat beside Sam on the cabin floor, her hands pressed over the bandaged wound at his side. His breathing was shallow, uneven, but it was there. She had fought all night to keep him tethered to life-boiling water, stitching torn flesh with trembling fingers, whispering words half prayer, half command. At moments he drifted, his eyes clouding, lips murmuring names that belonged to another time. Anna, Daniel. But each time, Claire pulled him back, her voice fierce. "Stay with me, not with them." Here now, as sunlight spilled through the cracked shutters, Sam stirred. His storm-gray eyes opened, unfocused, then found her. He tried to speak, but she pressed a finger to his lips. "You don't get to talk yet," she whispered, exhaustion pulling at her. "You just get to breathe." For the first time since she had met him, Sam obeyed without resistance. Days passed in a slow rhythm of survival. Claire tended the wound, changed bandages, fetched water from the stream, and stacked firewood. Sam, too weak to rise, watched in silence, the lines of pain etched deep in his face. But beneath that silence, something shifted. Where once there had been only grim resolve, there now lingered an ember, a fragile trust, lit by her unrelenting presence. At night, Claire would sit by the hearth, reading aloud from the letters she found, only the harmless ones, those written before tragedy. She read of small joys, the birth of a foal, a harvest gathered, a birthday gift carved from oak. She never touched the darker words. Sam would close his eyes, listening, his jaw tight but his breathing steadier. They were not husband and wife. They were not captor and captive. They were something in between, something new, born of survival and silence. It was nearly 3 weeks before Sam could stand unaided. He leaned against the doorframe, gaunt and pale, but alive. Claire stepped outside with him, the cold air sharp in their lungs. The valley stretched before them, scarred but beautiful, sagebrush sparkling with frost under the morning sun. Sam's voice, still rough, broke the silence. "You should have left me." Claire turned sharply, eyes blazing. "And where? Back to being someone's bargain, back to being owned?" Her words hung in the air. Sam looked away, shame flickering across his face. Before he could answer, a rider appeared on the ridge. Dust trailed his horse, the silhouette clear against the pale sky. Claire's breath caught as the figure drew closer. Richard Donovan. He was taller than Sam, broader through the shoulders, with a trimmed black beard and hair slicked beneath a felt hat. His coat was clean, his boots polished the mark of a man who had not fought for his survival in these hills. His eyes, a cold hazel, scanned the cabin and landed on Claire with a mixture of relief and irritation. "Claire," he called, reining in his horse. "Thank God." "We've been searching," Claire stiffened. Richard dismounted, boots striking the frozen ground. His smile was smooth, practiced, but it did not touch his eyes. "You've been through hell, cousin. Your family is waiting. I've come to bring you home." The word rang hollow. Claire's gaze flicked to Sam, who stood silent, his face unreadable. Richard stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You don't belong here with this. You're a Donovan. Your father left debts, and you're the payment. Come back, and we can settle it. You've always known your place." The words sliced deep. Claire's fists clenched at her sides. She remembered the auction block, the jeers, the shame. She remembered the rope biting her wrists, the gang's laughter, and she remembered Sam, bleeding at her feet, willing to die so she might live. "My place?" she said, her voice low but fierce. "You think I'm a debt to be collected?" Richard's smile thinned. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. You come with me or I drag you." His hand brushed the butt of his pistol. Sam moved then, stepping between them. Though still weak, his presence was iron. "You'll do no such thing." Richard sneered. "You? You're half-dead, Whitaker. You can't protect her." Sam's jaw tightened, but before he could answer, Claire stepped forward, placing herself between them both. They gathered in Dust Ridge the next morning. Word had spread like wildfire. The girl from the auction had returned, the broken cowboy at her side, and Richard Donovan demanding his claim. The townsfolk filled the square faces she remembered from that first brutal night. Richard stood tall, voice carrying over the murmurs. "This woman belongs to her family's debt. She was promised, and I've come to collect. That's the law." Claire's heart hammered, but she forced her voice steady. She stepped forward, every eye on her, and shouted so all could hear, "I was bought once. I will never be bought again." A hush fell. "This is my choice," she continued, her voice ringing across the square. "Not Richard's, not my family's, not any man's. Mine." She turned, finding Sam's eyes. He looked back at her as if seeing her for the first time. Not the girl from the block, not the scarred stranger in his cabin, but a woman standing free. The crowd shifted. Some gasped, some nodded, some whispered. Richard's face darkened. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You'll starve out here with nothing but a broken man for company." Claire's chin lifted. I would rather starve free than live as property. That evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, Sam led Claire to the meadow beyond Widow's Bluff. The townsfolk gathered again, not in jeers this time, but in quiet awe. From his pocket, Sam drew a small ring of hammered silver. Its edges were uneven, its shape imperfect, but it gleamed in the dying light. I made this, he said, voice low but steady. Not because I bought you, not because I saved you, but because you chose me. Claire's hands trembled as he slipped the ring onto her finger. The crowd watched in silence as the two stood beneath the vast western sky, the wind carrying their vows into the fading day. Sam took her hands, eyes bright with something unspoken. You gave me life when I had none left. Now I give you mine, whatever it's worth, Claire's voice broke, but her words were clear. And I give you mine, freely. The meadow held them in its quiet embrace, the scars of their battles behind, the promise of tomorrow before. Claire was no longer the bride who had been sold. She was the woman who had chosen. And in that choice, she had found not just freedom but love. Sometimes life places us on an auction block, not with chains of iron, but with the weight of loss, grief, and choices made by others. Yet Claire and Sam remind us of something timeless. Freedom is not given, it is claimed. Love is not bought, it is chosen. And even in the harshest deserts of despair, two broken souls can build a home where dignity, trust, and tenderness take root. Their story whispers to us that it is never too late to rise, to love, and to live as our true selves. Has this story left a gentle mark upon your heart? What emotions stayed with you as the journey came to an end? Share them with us in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for listening and walking with us through this tale. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next heartfelt story waiting to be shared.